It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Resistance is useless!
If you're a music fan, or worse, a record collector, then you know there's nothing more frustrating and expensive than trying to look for music that's currently out of print. Or even worse than that, music that's not available on Apple Music or Spotify. The truth is, there's a whole world of music that's not available on those platforms because they're not available anywhere. In some cases, there's hidden stashes of master tapes somewhere, or old recordings that have never been heard. Maybe it's for legal reasons. Maybe the stuff has been stored away in a cardboard box and forgotten about. Regardless of what might have happened to that music, the music isn't just music. Everything comes with its own history, its own story, and sometimes there are parts of that history that go unclaimed. Omnivore Recordings is a record label that reclaims that history. Their mission is to reach out, preserve, and in some cases, save that music from obscurity. They've restored, released, and carefully curated music from bands like Big Star, NRBQ, and the Beach Boys. They've released amazing stuff from jazz legends Art Pepper and Charlie Mingus. They've restored an enormous amount of music from country legend Buck Owens, comedy records from Ernie Kovacs. They've even released music from some of my favorites like Jellyfish, Bob Mould from Husker Du, and the criminally underappreciated band from Ireland, Pugwash. In 2015, Omnivore and my guest today won a Grammy for her work in restoring the best historical recording for Hank Williams, the Garden Spot program's 1950. Its co-owner is a woman that I've known for 36 years. We were classmates together in college at Marquette University. We even worked together in college radio years ago. Same professors, same circle of friends, so sit back and enjoy my conversation with my good friend Cheryl Pawelski from Omnivore Recordings on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
I am fighting this flu, not the horrible virus, but so if I start a little coughing thing, can you edit that out?
I can do anything, or I could just repeat it so it goes on for a few minutes.
That would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
We could like a 10-minute coughing fit. That'd be awesome. Perfect for these days, right?
Absolutely. So I think it's absolutely hilarious that you have two reasonably smart people that graduated from the same college. Yep. Neither one of us could figure out time zones. We must have missed time zone class.
Oh yeah, no, it happens to me all the time because I travel so much, and I'm desperately trying to figure out when I'm in another time zone. Like I always put it back to LA time, right?
Right.
But I had you in my calendar, and I don't know where I was. I mean, I had 5 trips in January. So I could have been anywhere in this country or Mexico because I was in Mexico too. So, you know, it's one of those things where I fuck stuff up so much because I can't figure out the time zone thing.
I had to do an international interview a couple weeks ago. I did it with Glenn Tilbrook of Squeeze. I literally had to figure out, okay, well, now wait a minute. How do I figure this out? And it hit me. Right. The internet could help me with this. And it did, thank goodness. And it went off without a hitch, but California time to Massachusetts probably a little bit more complicated for the two of us.
Well, it is if you put the time in when you're on the East Coast, and then it shows up as 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
On the West Coast, but it stays 10 o'clock. It doesn't switch back to 7 o'clock. You know what I mean?
I do. So
anyway,
I have been like every good alumni. I get the magazine once a quarter. Yeah. I go and search to see who's doing better than me and who I'm doing better than. And every now and then, your name pops up about all the things that you have done, and you win a Grammy Award. You start this company, Omnivore Recordings, and every time I read about what you've done, I immediately go and I start researching like interviews you've done and finding out more, because what I really find really interesting.
That's really sweet.
It's true, because to me it's kind of like, it's not just a record label where you're going out and you're trying to find the next band of 18-year-olds who are looking to become famous. It's
Right.
kind of a combination of like Antiques Roadshow and a musical history archive all rolled up in
Yes.
one.
Yes.
I think it's
I have-
awesome.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've always worked in the catalog area, and I'm interested, and the thing I'm most interested in is finding stuff that nobody knows about, and that could be unissued material, that could be an overlooked record, that could be anything like that, and it's sort of a personal march into the future, because I feel like we're both old enough to have seen so many records get left behind by configuration changes, right?
Right.
It happens quickly, more quickly than anybody thinks. And if anybody thinks that digital is the end all be all, they're fools. They don't know history, because somebody's going to figure out a way to make more money, and it'll probably slingshot back into the physical world. So
Right.
Who knows what we're going to see next?
I go back to when I was young, and I would buy a record, and I would look at and have that that tactile sensation of owning a piece of vinyl, and the liner notes were in there, and descriptions of the music, and maybe lyrics and everything else. But what's
Right.
fascinating about what you guys do is you're actually taking that package and actually adding like an historical reference to it. So
Right.
it's not just the album you're receiving, but it's also historical information that kind of puts in perspective what led up to recording this or discovering it. And I think there are so many bands that either didn't quite make the objective or got lost in the shuffle, that when
Right.
you guys are doing your job the right way, and I believe for the most part you have been, and a Grammy would prove that. It's pretty remarkable, and I know like one of the first bands I think of is Big Star, and I know that you've been very, very involved in kind of reclaiming what had been lost for so many years with that particular band.
Well, I think it's important not to lose certain things. And it's sort of my guiding light in all of this, besides the fact that I'm interested in the historical perspective. It's telling the story, right? You have to pull context, and you have to say, this is cool because, and you shouldn't miss this because. And by doing what we're doing right now, we get to throw it over the digital chasm, right? We get to throw it into the future
Right.
for weirdos like you and me to discover, on the other side. And it's something that otherwise may have been lost, or may take a long time for somebody else like us to discover. So, Big Star in particular was, that they were kind of a secret handshake band, right? If you knew who Big Star was, you were probably a fan of REM or the Replacements or any of sort of the Wilco, Sunvolt, Uncle Tupelo crowd.
Right.
And, but it was that secret handshake band, and there's a lot of those. When I was growing up, it was really, really hard to find Velvet Underground records. And you'd have to buy used records, which mostly got bought up. You'd have to find imports. And, I kind of feel like, okay, we're in this sort of ubiquitous era of music. It's been rendered into wallpaper.
Right.
And I feel like because there's access to it, we have to tell people what's important, because otherwise it's just a giant forest of music, and you can delete a file and never think about it again. And I think that's sad,
Well,
especially, yeah.
I was going to say, especially for a band like this, who I think, if the documentary came out a couple of years ago, and it was wonderful. But what you learn is this is a band that should have been a household name, but for any number of business reasons or distribution problems, it didn't happen, and it not only damaged the band, it became, like you say, like a forgotten treasure. Those first two albums are amazing, and the third album, which you guys repackaged, was one of these things where you can hear the pain of this band as they're trying to, or what remained of that band at that time, and it's a remarkable recording that would have been a shame if it had been lost forever.
Yeah, it was fun to go backwards on that one, and find the rest of the session stuff. Some of it was decayed badly. Some of the reels, the rough mixes that Jim Dickinson had done, were in pretty rough shape, and we saved everything we could. And I held out reissuing or issuing that whole package until we had those, because it felt like there was a missing link there.
Right.
And when Jim's estate and his sons and his widow they were graciously allowed us to go through those tapes, and what I knew was missing was actually there, and it was really wonderful. And I wish all the audio didn't have the problems it has, but to hear the transition from the demos through the sessions to Jim's rough mixes to Fry's final mixes, that was satisfying to me, to hear how that record became what it was.
So this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, this was one of Omnivore's first releases, right?
Well, what we did was there's been, disagreements for years as to what the sequence of the record would have been. And I was sitting in Memphis one time with John Fry, and I said, John, actually, and I think Jody was there too. And I said, you guys pitched a record, you pressed up these test pressings to pitch the record. Isn't that actually the way it probably should have been? And they're like, you're right. It's as close as anything.
Right.
So I thought, okay, cool. So let's present it that way, which is, so our first release was the third test pressing edition. And we released it for Record Store Day, what was it, 2011 or something? So that was our very first Omnivore release. And again, grateful to those guys for, being willing to take a chance and trust that this was a cool project.
A lot of your releases kind of have that same type of researching, and it just sounds like everything's like a buried treasure hunt in a lot of ways. Yeah. I would assume that when you're at the point where you're looking at a catalog of music that's either out of print or in danger of becoming out of print, it becomes even harder to obtain the rights to that music, especially if you're dealing with estates and legal matter. How do you go about finding stuff that is either almost phased out or gone?
Well, it's I've been in the business for 30 years now, so a lot of it comes to me. And that was my job at every label I worked at, which was sort of assessing what the right thing to do was. It's what's different about Omnivore is that I'm not at Capitol or Concord or Rhino, where my specific job is to work the catalog that we already control. So with Omnivore, I listen to artists and writers and producers and friends and managers and lawyers. I get pitched all kinds of stuff. And what was fun about starting Omnivore, and I realized this about me, I try to do impossible things because I think it's fun. I've made a lot of records, and so I figured it was time to not just curate records; it was time to curate a label. And so there's a big sifter that goes on, and I work with a lot of estates and a lot of artists. All four of us as partners have been in the business for a long time. And so we have a lot of relationships. So our job is to sort of filter it and think about, the audiences that we're talking to and the audiences that we want to talk to.
Right.
So that's big fun, and it's also impossible in this day and age. So, that just makes it all the more appealing to me. It really is we collectively decide on things, but there's some things that come in that we just say, yep, that's the right thing to do, or one of us is passionate about something, and we go and pursue that. And the rights issues are what they are. Again, that's, some things can't be done because there's legal stuff. I've had to wait years, sometimes decades, for legal wrangling to be done on some things before I could issue something. Sometimes it's really easy, because I do work with a lot of artists and estates and
Right.
managers and lawyers.
And then sometimes you just get lucky. The story.
Sometimes we get lucky.
The story I heard you tell about 5 years ago you won a Grammy for Hank Williams, the Garden Spot Program's 1950.
Oh yeah.
That story to me sounds like, man, this just fell right into your lap and you made something really special out of it.
Well, it did, but remember, I've known Colin Escott for years. I've known George Gamark, who actually found the actual discs themselves for years. So it's a relationship sort of thing, I think to be successful at anything, you gotta know it when you see it, and you have to ask all the right questions. That's a tool that you always need to sharpen in doing what I do.
It's not only music in Omnivore. You've also released some stuff. Ernie Kovac's, the comedy records that he did, which I think is pretty fascinating because one, the guy was a genius, and I don't think I've ever heard him on audio. I've just seen old clips of him visually. How did you come up with that stuff?
A dear friend of mine named Josh Mills, who's a publicist in LA. His mom was Edie Adams, and it's his lot in life, besides working publicity, to be the caretaker of the Ernie and Edie estates and archives. So naturally, when I found out there was an unissued Percy Dove Tonsils record, I thought to myself, "Ooh, that's fun. I want to tell that story."
Right.
So, and it did have a really good story, and you can read about it in the liner notes.
Yes, well, there you go. But the amazing thing is there's a wide breadth of artists and different kinds of music. To go from NRBQ to Buck Owens to the Art Pepper records that you've released. Yeah. There's an extraordinary amount of Buck Owens material that you guys have repackaged, which I for one, I knew he'd been around for forever and ever. I didn't realize that he had as many albums out there as he did.
Oh, a huge amount. And that's an estate that we've been fortunate to work with. A very good producer friend of ours named Patrick Milligan had a relationship there. And the estate trusted us to do some stuff. That was Omnivore release number 2. We issued a single on that same record store day. Those were our first 2 releases. And, we were able to get really creative with the Buck stuff because Buck was a very, very smart businessman. When he was going back to re-sign to Capitol Records, I think in the 80s, he made a deal to own his earlier catalog. And so, the estate controls it, which is fantastic. And it also gives us the opportunity to really have fun. And the estate has enjoyed that creativity. I being a collector, a voracious collector myself, I had always had this Buck Owens coloring book. And I thought this is a really weird thing. Like, why would there be a Buck Owens coloring book? So I called up the guy, Jim, at the estate, and I said, hey, I don't know, do you own the rights to this? Because, it's kind of weird. And I'm kind of thinking, there's 4 songs that they mention in the coloring book. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to issue red, white, and blue flexies of those 4 songs? He's like, maybe. And I said, so who owns the right to this? He said, well, how many do you want? I said, how many do you have? They had like 2,500 original 1972 Buck Owens coloring books up in Bakersfield. So we rented a truck, drove up to Bakersfield, got them, made some flexies, and had a packing party one night. And I think that may have been our 2nd or 3rd record store day. What I learned about that experience, though, was sometimes, again, it's asking the right questions and all that and having fun with this. But I think most people missed the fact that these were 1972 coloring books. I think I got a little heady in the creativity because they were just sort of like, oh, it's really nice that you reprinted that coloring book. I said, no, man, that's 1972 vintage.
Yeah, those are the real
came
things.
From Buck Owens. So, it's that got missed, I think, in a lot of the press about it. But it was really fun to do, and we just had a pizza packing party, and it took a long time to put those together. So if you find one out in nature, now you know the backstory.
You've had a very long career, like I said, 30 years in the music business, and I know that before Omnivore there was A&R that you were involved in and other archiving stuff, and that your career has had multiple different arcs. But what was when you left college? Where did you start this whole thing out?
I quit I don't know. What did we have back after college? What do you call it when you get like an internship, right?
Yeah. And
I was heading in sort of a advertising sort of direction because it was as creative as I could find. I know we did radio station stuff and TV station stuff, and the problem for me was there was no pathway to what I do. People say to me all the time, oh man, I wish I had your job. And there is no job. I created this job. And growing up, when we did, there was no representation of women working in the music business at all. Jack Holtzman, the founder of Elektra, said to me one time in a meeting, he said, Cheryl, I really wish we would have had you back in the day. And I said, well, Jack, that's really great. Thank you. But I would have been a secretary. And he said, you're right. I'm glad we have you now. And that's, that was wonderful, but it's there was no pathway to this. So I left that internship and I took a job at Radio Doctors.
I remember that.
In downtown Milwaukee, because I figured if I was always compelled towards music. And
in fact, I think I may have bought a number of albums with you in that store at that time.
Yeah, probably.
Because I believe me, I would donate plasma, and half the money would go to beer, and the other half of the money would go to Radio Doctors.
Well, it was like Stone Roses. I remember that was big at that time, and then when the Beatles records came out on CD for the first time, that was it was a lot of fun. And I went to work there because, as you know, or maybe not, it was a giant store. It was called what they called a one-stop. And so it was a little sub-distributor for other stores that needed records. So we had a warehouse downstairs, a separate classical store, jukebox section for 45s. And other stores around Wisconsin would order onesie-twosies from Radio Docs. And the reason I went there was to learn about one-stops, but to also learn about distribution. And at a certain point, I learned what I needed to learn at retail. And our mutual friend, Grego, came home one day and said, I'm going to move to L.A. and be a film guy. And I said, cool, I'll move to L.A. and be an A&R chick. So we left. And, we slept on some friend's floor, Anthony, and who
I also know, right?
Yeah. And so we made a little spot on his living room floor, and Grego he got a gig as like a gaffer or something on a Disney pilot that afforded us our first really cruddy apartment, and then I started temping at Capitol Records and stayed there for 12 years.
So from there, you go from Capitol, and then you move on to like artist-driven stuff.
Well, so they blew up Capitol. They laid off about 1,800 people in one day worldwide. So I didn't take it personally. But I was a little bit at sea because, you spend a dozen years of your young life in one place. That was really a storied record company. It was one of the first big, maybe the first big, independent West Coast major label. And I know that seems at odds, but it started as a little upstart independent and became
a behemoth.
Capitol Records.
Right.
And when I started there in 1990, people. All the artists, not all of them, but a lot of artists that built that place were still alive. Martin Denny and I would call each other for our birthdays. He was in Hawaii, and I think his birthday was either April 10th or April 12th. So he'd call me, and then the next day I would call him to wish him a happy birthday. And he did so many of those sort of lounge records that sort of came back into fashion. And Les Paul, a good Oshkosh, Wisconsin guy. He'd walk in the tower and he'd be like, "Hey, Milwaukee." I'd say, "Hey, Oshkosh," And so, man, what a thrill to work there.
Yeah.
I smashed into Donny Osmond in the stairwell one time. That was terrifying. But,
Did you get a running start at him, or?
Yeah, totally. And I, lowered my shoulder.
Right, of course.
He was actually a super nice guy. And a lot of my favorite artists were there at the time, folks like Richard Thompson and Johnny Clegg and Crowded House and Bonnie Raitt. It was sort of the last whiff of that music business. And when they blew it up, I was a little bit at sea. I felt like, oh man, I don't know if I want to go back into what I considered the corporate wind tunnel of music. It really was difficult for me. And what nobody knew was it was the beginning of the contractions of the business as we knew it. So I consulted during, the next 2 years. I programmed for Apple, and I ran a little subsidiary as a consultant of Rhino called Rhino Handmade. And what we did was we developed direct-to-consumer limited edition sort of high-end hyper-collectible packages that couldn't survive at retail, but we could market to a particular audience. And what was important about that was my now partner at Omnivore, Greg Allen, who does all the design and art and photography and production, he was my counterpart at Handmade. So I would do what I do now, which is product development and A&R functions, and then he would make it look pretty, and we would get it out into the world. It wasn't until Concord called, because they had come out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy and had bought the Fantasy Records catalog, which included all these great jazz labels, Prestige, Milestone, Riverside. They had Stax, they had Specialty, and I couldn't resist. So I went over to head up catalog A&R, and I was only there for a year and a little bit, and Rhino called, and frankly, the commute was killing me to Beverly Hills, so I went to head up Rhino, because at the time that was like playing center field for the Yankees, or in my case, shortstops.
Right. Once you got involved in the Frontier catalog, that's when things started to really kind of ramp up and get the idea of, we could do something with a lot of the stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always been on the catalog side. That's what I did at Capitol too. And after Capitol, what I realized is I didn't know enough to start a label at that point, but I thought about it. And so I needed to be in different environments and record company cultures. I was forced to move around, which actually turned out to be the best thing, because I learned a ton. And so post Rhino, it was pretty easy for me to make a determination that, first of all, I wasn't going to get laid off again because of the business. I was tired of that.
Right.
And my wife was saying, I don't want you to go back and work for people that don't respect music and don't respect you again. And I'm like, okay, well then that means we're going to be poor. And she said, I don't care. Now's the time to start your label. So she named it. And now she's a lit professor. So, it was good to go to her for a word. But now we've been around 10 years, and we're having, distribution issues notwithstanding that you can look up on your own.
Right.
We had our best year last year. So, I feel pretty good about where we are right now. And, we have a lot of flexibility. We've been acquiring catalogs. We bought 2 labels and their associated publishing so far. We bought the reggae label Nighthawk, and we also bought 60s, early 70s soul label out of Baltimore called Rujak. And so we're interested in pursuing more of that. And one of my partners, Brad, is very much comes from the publishing world, so we're developing that part of the company. And so, yeah, I mean, we're just going at it, and we still do consulting too. So we're, like the new Hank Williams is on BMG. We just did a book box set for them.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about streaming and how kids today don't know any better, like the good old farts like you and me. But the truth of the matter is that streaming has very much changed the way people consume music, and certainly, like I said, that tactile sensation of holding a record is not lost, but it certainly isn't what it used to be. How has it affected a company like yours? I mean, I know distribution has to be an issue, but when streaming seems to have enveloped so much of the music industry now, how does it? What's the challenge for you guys?
Well, everything is working against us right now, but that's not to say that we don't participate in the digital realm. We do. When we have the rights, we issue things digitally. When the artist or the record or the audience will support it, we'll issue things on vinyl and we'll issue things on CD. There's a whole group of people that still prefer CDs. They either grew up in the era of CDs, and so bands of that era, unless they're hyper collectible, we issue on CD. And, CD, once the industry figured out how to master for that digital format, they're wonderful, especially for archival stuff, because you have longer playing, that had its detriments with bands that just padded out 80 minutes because they could. I'm a firm believer that what you leave off a record is the most important thing. It's like, give me 35 minutes and thank you. Make me want to play it again. But it really depends on the record and the audience. So, in some ways it hasn't been all that negative. We speak mainly to an audience that enjoys a deliberate listening experience, and that usually means listening, not flitting through files or deciding 10 seconds into something on Spotify that you don't like this track and you're going to go to something else, or just leaving it run and having it be wallpaper. And those are absolutely correct ways to listen to music, right?
I agree.
We still have radio. It's the Dick Clark thing, right? It's got a good beat. You can listen to it or you could dance to it. That's great. Everything doesn't have to be this sort of sacrosanct moment where you sit down and you put the record on. But
I still find myself shopping around for CDs just to fill up some of the things that I had missed, and I go back and discover not necessarily new music, but like even the stuff that you and I were playing on college radio. The stuff that you forget. I've probably forgotten more music than I remember. And then I go back and say, oh, yeah, that's right. I love that. I love that band back then. And that's always fun. That's always fun. That rediscovery is always, I think, is a real pleasure. Yeah.
Well, and some of it is worn well, and some of it I think, what was I thinking?
One of the bands that I've loved since they came out, and I know you guys have been involved in some of their catalog. You put a box set out, and in fact, I just talked to Jason Faulkner a couple weeks ago from Jellyfish, and Jellyfish is like one of those bands, kind of in a way similar to what Big Star was, a band that probably should have been bigger, but they came out at a really odd time. It's kind of hard to compete with almost a psychedelic look when Nirvana is out kicking everybody's ass all over the place.
It was funny because when I was at Capitol, we part of the Capitol label group was included Virgin Records, and they had the Jellyfish stuff. And there was a guy I worked with in the division I was in, named Kevin Flaherty, and he kept going on and on and on and on and on about Jellyfish. And so I listened to it and I was, wow, these are sort of perfect records. They're really amazing. And but we just couldn't get anybody interested at the label. It was a different era. There were different priorities at the label. I mean, I couldn't even get them interested in reissuing the band records. It took me a long time to, stomp up and down about that, and finally they did it. But with Jellyfish, Kevin was really aggressive about it. Thank God, because Not Lame came and licensed the material from us and put out that really wonderful box set and sort of set the table for, when we started Omnivore. And, it's Jason and Roger and everybody in the band. Both iterations of the band have been really supportive, and we were really, really pleased to get that stuff back out there because they do have a crazy dedicated fan base.
They do.
And yeah.
And there's a lot of other, it's almost like this, it's like a band that has metastasized other great music as a result of it. And Faulkner's solo stuff, the Grays, TV Eyes is another one that you guys did. It's like there's a lot of music from that small band. It only put 2 albums out. Listen to me blubber on like this.
You're such a fanboy.
I am. I'm a totally fan. I had to really kind of bite my tongue with Faulkner because I was like, I want to fanboy so badly, but I want to maintain my cool. But of course, I am who I am.
Did you hear the record he did with our Stevie Moore a couple of years back?
I did. Yes.
Oh my God, I got to see those guys at South by Southwest, and that was just fabulous. Jason's he's just awesome.
He's
an awesome
tremendous,
musician.
talented guy.
Yeah.
So what?
Roger too.
Yeah, all of them really. So what?
Mm-hmm.
So what is? So what do you guys got coming out next? I know you got a lot of things in the works right now.
Yeah, I can never talk about that stuff.
Well,
no, I'll tell you why. Because if I drop something in here and it doesn't happen, there are 8 billion reasons why it might not happen. And so I never really want to get people's hopes up. And I can tell you benign things like we're issuing our Reggae Nighthawk catalog on vinyl. And that's just not very salacious or interesting.
No, but that's good enough. That's enough for me. Yeah. There you go. And
yeah.
Actually, anyone can go on the website omnivorerecordings.com and see what's coming up because you guys are pretty up to date with all the new releases and everything. So it's pretty good that way. Well, Cheryl.
It's just I've learned. I've learned to be cautious.
No, listen. Hey, I appreciate you spending some time today. It's a pleasure kind of catching up with you. It's only been 30 some odd years since the last time we chatted, but this was fun and I appreciate it.
Anytime. I like to talk tunes. It's what I do.
Well,
and blast from the past is really fun to talk.
And we can talk without recording equipment sometime too. That would be fun also.
I totally agree. And if you make it to Portland or LA, let me know.
I will. Cheryl, thank you so much.
All right.
Take care.
All right. Take care.
All right. You know what? That was pretty cool. You can check out other episodes of the podcast on BaxtonO'Brien.com. Check out the Baxies Fun Bag page on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.